to discuss how UNESCO and ADB are collaborating on strengthening the network of UNESCO Futures Chairs in Asia and the Pacific. I think we all realized and learned it doesn't help to have just these great meetings and talk, but we need some actions on the ground, and we need to do this through our local partners and local experts and local futures. And I can see Sherman here nodding his head, which is great. I can see Lizanne already here from the Philippines. So with that, I think we want to start and hear from UNESCO first, some opening remarks, and then we'll continue with the session.
Dear colleagues at the Asian Development Bank, in UN agencies, and from across the region, it is an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you today. Thank you for the invitation. Let me begin by stating the obvious. If we are unable to learn to change the topic of this Knowledge Forum, humanity will not survive. One strong message after another makes this clear. The threat of climate extinction, the devastation inflicted by COVID-19, the deepening inequalities and rivalries between and across nation states that are tearing us apart. But there is more. We need to be able to learn from changes that inflict pain and suffering, but we also need to be able to learn from those changes that make good on our aspirations. The changes that eliminate oppression, the changes that enable well-being for all. And the bottom line is that we must be able to learn from change. This is our only hope. And yet, even with this paramount need, we continue to fall short. This puts this challenge in historical perspective. And let me bring a short excerpt of a speech given by a famous French author that you know, Albert Camus, when he accepted the Nobel Prize of Literature in 1957. Each generation, and I quote, doubtless feels called upon to reform the world. Mine knows that it will not reform it, but its task is perhaps even greater. It consists in preventing the world from destroying itself. Of course, he was speaking during the depths of the Cold War. He was frightened by the atomic bomb. He was warning on the danger of yet another world war. Right now, even though the possibility of a nuclear annihilation remains, we are acutely aware of many other threats. We know that our societies are being torn apart by fear of change and fear of the difference that change brings. Inequality, the digital divide, COVID-19 shocks, climate catastrophes, all point to the need to learn to change. And change is the only certainty. But if we are so clear about it, what is stopping us when our very survival depends on being better able to learn from change? At UNESCO, we do not have the answers, but we have some suggestions that might help us cope with this. For us, it is time for humanity to become futures literate. Futures literacy is overarching human capacity that has been documented and promoted by UNESCO. Futures literacy can be compared to reading and writing literacy. Both are anchored in basic human capabilities. Reading and writing augments humanity's linguistic skills. On their side, futures literacy augments an equally universal and basic skill, the ability of everyone, even a baby, before they can talk, to anticipate. Think of it this way. No one can visit the future. There is no evidence that can be gathered from the future. What we can do is to observe and understand better, much better, why and how we imagine the future. In other words, why and how we anticipate. By gaining a better understanding of the origins and impact of our expectations about the future, we become better able to put the immense power of the human imagination to good use. Now more than ever, we must understand better how the futures we imagine influence what we see, what we do, what we think, and crucially, what it means to be human today. This is what futures literacy is all about. Founded on the science of anticipation, It entails the study and mastery of a capability that is available to everyone, from the young person discovering new opportunities to the CEO attempting to find outside-the-box strategic options. Enhancing our capacity to imagine the future has immense payoffs. But first and foremost, it makes it easier to learn from change. By becoming more adept at grasping the motivations and sources behind the futures we imagine, that is, by becoming more futures literate, we become significantly better able to learn from the many different kinds of change that are constantly taking place all around us. The need to develop this capacity is made evident by the global network of practitioners and researchers mobilized by the social and human science sector of UNESCO that I'm proud to lead. Working closely with partners from around the world, our innovative team has demonstrated that futures literacy makes it easier to understand change. When a young person in Egypt is offered an opportunity to explore future of well-being, they discover new ways of understanding today's changes. The menu of potential actions grows, emerging from unexpected sources, going to novel directions. When the Prime Minister's office in Uruguay dives into the rich field of cultural futures, they expose new avenues for action that were hidden by yesterday's image of tomorrow. New horizons shed light on new pathways, alternative starting points arising from previously unimagined endpoints. When a Syrian refugee in Lebanon or a UN agency pursuing disaster risk reduction in Indonesia, or a group of innovators in Kenya, or any other community that builds up their ability to use the future, finds out what is the future they want to shape and what they see and do right now to shape it. Let me repeat this point. The futures that we are constantly imagining directly, it really influences the way we look at it today and how we can build better tomorrow to address the challenges we're facing. Perception precedes action, and imagined futures have a pervasive impact on what we see and the meaning we give to what we see, including change. With a better understanding of the changes taking place all around us, with a better appreciation of the fact that uncertainty is the only certainty, with a better ability to fabricate our own images of the future, action becomes better informed, choices are made with greater appreciation of the different futures that drive our hopes and fears, expectations, and motivations. All told, futures literacy is a powerful way to improve what we see, learning from change, and what we do, expressing our judgments and values now. And the good news is that future literacy is not some esoteric, technocratic, or elite skill only accessible to the lucky few. No, it's a capability that everyone can improve and acquire. And it can be improved relatively easily. The work we have been doing in the social and human science sector at UNESCO has demonstrated this over and over again. We have run hundreds of rigorously co-designed living laboratories, what we call futures literacy laboratories, that show in every practical and high-impact fashion that anyone and everyone can become more futures literate. Plus, crucially, this is a capability fit for our times. COVID-19 drives home the point that we must change our approach to the future. We have generated too many unintended consequences. Now we have climate change and greater inequality. We have built in too much path dependency that pushes us to defend and entrench past mistakes. We have become too fragile, stuck in the brittle and stagnant patterns of the past. We need to change. We have no choice but to embrace change, to learn from change right now. And this means that we need to become better able to break out of the old boxes, and this is when futures literacy is key. Since it is the future that shapes our boxes, often without us even being aware. So many of our images of tomorrow lock us in to seeing and acting in ways that just extrapolate, one way or another, the past. We must become better able to invent new assumptions, new frames for imagining the future, new analytical tools. We need to use the futures to imagine and help us to really take advantage of change. And this leads me to my conclusion. Given that no one disputes the importance of learning from change, given that futures literacy is a crucial ingredient for becoming better able to learn from change, given that futures literacy is a capacity that can be cultivated by everyone, everywhere, this is why the time has come to ramp up investment in the development and diffusion of futures literacy. That is why we are joining forces with the Asian Development Bank to build a major futures literacy network in the Asian Pacific region. This is why the social and human science sector of UNESCO has been championing the creation of a new network of chairs in futures studies or futures literacy that is growing rapidly, already covering every part of the world, and is expected to involve some 50 universities by 2022. We're really excited about this. And that is why the UN coordination body mandated UNESCO to lead efforts across the UN system to build a community of practice that integrates future literacy into all of its activities. Building the foundations for a capacity-based approach to development going beyond 2030. All of this resonates with the recent efforts by many world leaders, from the Secretary General of the United Nations to the G20, to find ways to reinvent and reinforce crucial global public goods. These are our shared resources like hospitable climate and common rules for harnessing the potential of everything from artificial intelligence to cross-border traveling. The topic of this forum, learning through change, is no accident, I know. We sense the writing on the wall. Our planet is sending us a message. A virus is sending us a message. At the core of my job leading the human and social science sector at UNESCO is the ambition and need to learn from change. This is also at the core of UNESCO's role as a global laboratory of ideas. Please join us in building futures literacy around the world. Please unleash your imagination, because it's the source of both what you see and what do you want to see, and also what you want to imagine to make better choices so we can improve the outcomes using the future. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone.
There you are, John. Yeah, I want good that you take us on.
Great. Thanks so much, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you for this session. It's very exciting to see so many friends and colleagues joining. We have a lot to discuss and not a lot of time to do it. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is John Sweeney. I'm a senior research fellow at Westminster International University in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, one of the candidate co-chairs for a UNESCO chair in anticipatory governance and sustainable policymaking, and really excited to have a number of colleagues from across the region on. I wanted to just pick up on a few things that Gabriela had mentioned and then quickly get into our first panel discussion. Really, the idea for this particular session, and of course the between ADB and UNESCO, out of a question, and the question, of course, is something that Gabriela really put in front of us. How do we begin to change with the change that we see unfolding all around us? So how do we think about new relations and new partnerships, new opportunities to foster learning and unlearning? And specifically, how do we bring that to government? How do we bring that to civil society? How do we find ways of having different conversations about the critical risks and challenges that we all see unfolding around us? And so really the seed of this idea came out of exactly that kind of thinking. What might it look like for a regional network driven by the existing global networks and of course the strong regional and national local networks of both ADB and UNESCO, and how might the chairs specifically be able to support that? So it's very exciting to have a number of the chairs with us. We've got representatives from Malaysia, Philippines, and Uzbekistan. to be able to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing, their vision for what this network may be able to do, and also what they see as some of the opportunities to enhance the kinds of ways that futures literacy can spread further across the region. And of course, to pick up on already the existing work that's being done both by ADB and UNESCO, and to strengthen that work by looking at collaborative opportunities together. So I'm very excited to kick things off by asking the chairs from Malaysia. So we've got Professor Sohail Inayatullah, as well as Professor Zainal Abidin Sanusi from Malaysia, and they just launched their chair yesterday. And so I invite them to take the floor to speak a little about their chair, a little about the work that they're doing, and also a little bit about this opportunity space that they see for an ADB UNESCO network.
Thanks, John. Prof. Zainal, do you want to go first, or do you want to let me talk? Let me know.
I think you'll go first, Hal.
Okay, thanks so much. So I want to go onwards from learning about the future comment. In our case, the last 4 years, the UNESCO chair was at USIM, is now switched to Zainal's Center for Sustainability and Wellbeing. But I think the point we almost forget, the learning is not so simple. So in our work, we talk about zero loop learning, where you present information to a DG, a minister, or prime minister, and they don't hear it because they don't have a framework. So it's just data. And so I know many mayors I work with, this is fantastic. Will this help me get reelected? So it became quickly clear, even merely giving information about risk or fear doesn't work. So then we try to shift more and more to what's called single loop learning. Here's learning that will help you enhance your competitive ability. We did this with ADB in Kazakhstan. How can Kazakhstan become more competitive globally? So that's the kind of single loop language nations, communities, cities understand. How can they advance? Our challenge, as all of us know, is the nature of the future is changing, sometimes exponentially, sometimes goes backward. The rhythms of change are not predictable. So merely saying, let's just do it, let's be more competitive, futures will optimize your strategy, works in many nations, and it can really stop you. Why? Because there's this notion about the unknown. So we move to double loop learning, as we've been trying to do throughout Asia Pacific Futures Network, hundreds of clients throughout with ADB, with other countries, to say, what don't we know? And that becomes the exciting question. Do we understand AI in terms of gender equity? Do we understand the role of 3D printing in localizing globalization? So by going to what we don't know, we change the discourse, we change the framework, and this scares many decision makers because they don't want to go, I don't want to go into feared worlds, I want certainty. And this becomes the tension that we're seeing in our work throughout the Asia Pacific and globally. So what do we do then? So clearly for us, we had the launch yesterday. It was how do we build better partnerships? And that moves to futures as narrative futures. So narrative futures is not strategic foresight. We use information so our country is better than your country. Narrative futures is about what's the story we're telling each other so we can go on a partnership. We had a fantastic project with the Pacific Commission, and they said, we will not adopt narratives from the outside world. So as we think about futures, they quickly came up with their own story, which was about a flotilla of vacas, canoes joined. So now this changed the narrative from the normal one, industrial, continental, to the Pacific Ocean itself as a continent. So how do you do it? You find a story in which you can work together with other people. So the narrative futures finds story, uses the future for transformation, but it's not just the others that are transforming. This is the critical part. In terms of Asia, we understand we're part of the solution, we're part of the problem. So we ask leaders, ministers, directors, who are you in this flotilla? So this moves future from something external, they're doing it in development language, we will do this to you, to know we're doing this together. So then the DG said, okay, he's the one that builds the wood. Someone else says, well, they're the navigator. A third person said, well, they like to row. So now suddenly, based on the emerging story about the future, the people in the organization know who they are. This moves away from fear, I don't believe a word you're saying, it's foresight as information dump, to futures as an active component of co-creating moving forward. And it does this through a narrative that makes sense in the local environment. We're very clear, Futures is an overall framework, but the local knowledge in each country, each organization sets the framework. Concluding, I got a call from one international organization. We started 5 years ago, but the project died after a year. And it died because they said their metaphor was an old, blind, crippled elephant. They said, we can't get information about the future because we're dying. And now there's a new DG. That person is number 2 in this UN organization, and she remembers futures from 10 years ago. So now she can say, we have to transform the elephant to a story and then be able to read the weak signals of change because we have a better story. A dying elephant cannot brace for tsunamis. A dying elephant can't see weak signals. A dying elephant can't find opportunities. So it's changing the deep culture of us, deep culture of our institutions. And for me, the VACA flotillas, I like it because it means at ADB, UNESCO, the countries, we're finding a story where we find who we are, we partner together with who you are, and we work towards that direction. That direction is not the future. That direction is the emergent story we're creating, which leads us together into unknown worlds.
Thanks so much, Sohail. Zainal, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, okay, all right. Picking up from there, what happened in IUM is to translate that how is that shift possible. Yeah? What we do is that putting up among the staff or the whole university members, a whole institution's transformations approach, mean that it start from the bottom level, even the governance level, up to the board of governance level, with an argument that we've been living so long under the factory style educations. So we want to shift now from the factory style to real options of making it a garden oasis of knowledge and different scenarios as to how we used to. We put up a narrative like between the two, the weird world and the wiser world. The weird world is something that we define westernized, economic centric, industry-led, reputations obsessed, referring to ranking, and the D is dehumanizing, meaning that many of the subjects are looking at human capital rather than human being. So we are moving to the wiser model, which is holistic. This is where I get started. So holistic and the sustainability is a main component, because I don't play the slide, John, just to save the time. Yeah, but the word of wiser is to illustrate or to represent the argument of being holistic, being humanistic, based on sustainability. Yeah. So from there, we have put this into action. It's not just a rhetorical argument in academics, but we put in actions from Sohail joining us in USM 2005. That was 15 years back. Yeah. And that was enabled USM to be a distinct university to achieve status Apex University. And Apex University is the #1 university that push for a different kind of future, for a different kind of model. Meaning that university is not based on ranking, university is based on bottom billion, serving the bottom billion. So from there, we move on. I mean, at least based on that 5 model that we figured out, one of them is University in the Garden. So University in the Garden, there is one that's being implemented in USM now. So moving on from that exercise or experience of science in Malaysia, I brought the same approach, and together with Sohail as well, into the Ministry of Education Leadership Academy. So what happened is that we call all the deputy vice chancellors and the deans to design the collections of scenarios. So there we move on, but dealing with 20 universities run by, strong link to the government, it's not easy to have one particular scenarios. But somehow that approach of futures thinking, future scenarios is somehow penetrated the thinking of the university's governance. And finally, to the next stage, John, we bring it up to where we are now. Meaning there's a collections of experience from the 2 institutions, 2 experience before. Now, recently launched, like you said, the chair at IIUM, pushing specifically for sustainability, for sustainability and well-being. And being an Islamic university, we are still using the same argument of we need to have that spirituality, we need to have that sustainability among them, and that is being translated specifically with missions of IIUM is humanizing, educations through sustainable development and Maqasid Sharia. This is the human universal values, universal purpose of Islamic jurisdictions. So that kind of thing. So what happened is that all the staff members, at least representative different categories, the staff association, the academic association, so they go through the exercise of building the scenarios, the buying in of all the scenarios. So we did the same 5 scenarios, and then we come up with a Sejahtera model of university. So that Sejahtera word is now being the buzzword, is now being the main mantra in that university, which everyone is striving for that. So that's how the experience of how we make the whole institutions transforming towards becoming the kind of university that we want. So that's how, John, as much as I can share to how the actual experience on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sohail and Zainal. And I think that the takeaways for me are finding the right metaphor, being able to understand how to move forward with that narrative framing, that sense, and then also how to, and a very great example of how to take that to the organization and how to make that something that's part of the institution, and of course something that can help to drive change. We're going to jump now over to colleagues from the Philippines. I'm delighted to have a friend. We worked together many times, Professor Sherman Cruz, and also Dr. Lizan Perante Kalina join us and talk a little bit about their chair and the work that they've been doing, the amazing work that they've been doing, the prolific work that they've been doing. I always see amazing things coming out of the Philippines. So over to you both. We'd love to hear a bit about your chair, a bit about the opportunities you see across the region, and how you think this network may be able to further support futures literacy.
Thank you very much, John. The Philippine Futures Literacy Initiative started as a series of incubation projects in 2013. You know, the seeds were planted at Northwestern University in 2013. And then as an incubation project, there were several improvisations and experiments, done in terms of design and engagement as far as public institutions and communities are concerned. And then eventually over the years, we would realize that the drivers as far as futures literacy in the country is concerned is primarily driven by two things. One is political access. Second is the socio-civic engagement. So over the years, as we've learned, as several insights emerge in this series of improvisation and experimentation, different concepts and different types of futures and foresight from the Filipino perspective would emerge. Like, for example, the idea of making the future intimate, primarily because Filipinos are sincere. They have this view of that, faith is a critical and crucial element of decision making. We're a Catholic country, and then of course Filipino people are pretty kind of emotional. And in this series of workshop, we would see our participants, emitting some sort of tears of joy every time they realize that a potential possible alternative future is possible. Then the issue was, how might we be able to institutionalize this? So, and then as it would evolve and grow, the national government would pick up, the idea of a futures thinking. And this is where the Development Academy of the Philippines would come in, particularly the Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovations and Futures Thinking. And of course, under the leadership of Dean Lizan Perante Kalina, amplify the voice of futures thinking and foresight in the country. That will be later on explained by Dean Lizan. But then for the UNESCO chair in the Philippines at Northwestern University, there are several priorities that we have in mind. One is to link, futures literacy in the context of anticipatory governance and regenerative cities, with a particular focus on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. How might we be able to do that? So we've been doing it in the last 2 to 3 years, from initiating anticipatory governance laboratories and action learning workshops, continually experimenting, designing, and imagining ways by which we can improve the process of our futures literacy courses and short programs in research, agenda, and the City Futures Workshop, and of course, which is something that we cannot ignore, no, networking by organizing and supporting country initiatives, and particularly the regional futures literacy events. So the audience that we have engaged with over the years includes city leaders, policymakers, civil society actors, public administration, students and professors, and other stakeholders. And then the learning is that we realized at the Philippine Futures Thinking Society is that there is an emerging approach of foresight that we began to introduce and realize in terms of the narrative and the approach, which is the Hiraya foresight approach, meaning it is praxis driven. You know, it is an action learning knowledge based approach to foresight, which is the intent really is to enable, you know, the fruits of our imaginations and actions and dreams to inform public policy in a societal approach. Yeah. Dean Lizan.
Yeah, thank you, Sherman. Yeah, thank you, John. Sorry, I can just switch on my video. Well, anyway, taking off from what Sherman mentioned earlier about the gains on introducing features literacy years ago, just last year or 2019, when we introduced the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, together with the Development Academy of the Philippines Graduate School of Public and Development Management, and also the Senate Committee, we saw so much excitement from our stakeholders coming from different sectors of the society. We introduced this through knowledge co-creation, and I would like to take off from what Sohail mentioned, that knowledge that creates action that changes us all. I really believe in this because for more than 15 months, when we introduced features literacy in the country, we saw a sort of movement. We saw interest, we saw passion and commitment from different stakeholders, from state universities and colleges, from local government units, including national government agencies, and also our policymakers. So that's why Sherman mentioned about political access as well as societal access. So it's really a movement that the interest is coming from the ground, not really from the government. And the government right now is really interested on how to operationalize and how to make futures thinking and futures literacy as a handle in decision making. So earlier on, we introduced Hiraya foresight as we indigenous foresight and futures thinking. We introduced that with the local government officials, particularly with the Department of Interior and Local Government as the lead agency in really promoting local governance. And in 2022, we will be implementing the Mandanas ruling, which is, of course, increasing the financial capacity or funds of the local government units. And they are really interested in using futures thinking and futures literacy. So the work that we are doing now is gaining interest and commitment. And we see that we are already on our second stage, because the first stage was the democratization of futures thinking in the Philippines. The second stage is on deepening it. And the third phase is on the institutionalization. So on the institutionalization part, we are about to introduce a master's degree in futures thinking, because we started with a certificate course and we produce 100+ students for just less than a year. We are already on our fourth batch next year. And the master's degree program would really lead us to the institutionalization, wherein we will be able to train our next leaders, because we will be on the election period. We will be having new set of leaders come 2022. And likewise, the Senate, the government is funding research activities on SDGs using futures thinking lens. So this kind of acceptance would really lead us to the institutionalization of futures thinking. And likewise, we have a draft bill already on creating a national academy on foresight or anticipatory governance, whatever will be the right title for that bill. And this National Academy is somehow autonomous, so that we will be able to extend our elbows in really introducing innovations in the political administrative system. So far, I would say that the introduction of Futures Literacy Program in the Philippines is an exciting work for all of us Filipinos. So that's it for me, John. Thank you.
Yeah, just a
Thank you
quick
so
response
much.
to Suzanne's a question. There are three national government agencies that have started their institutionalization program. One is the Department of Health, which is the institutionalization of strategic foresight into the institution, and they are using Futures and Foresight to reimagine the future of universal healthcare by 2040. And then the result of that scenario will inform policy debates and agenda setting for DOH. Another one is the Department of Interior Local Government, which is the implications of the Mandanas ruling about trying to rethink and build scenarios now on how might devolution and decentralization look like in a post-Mandanas ruling scenario. And other than that, of course, is also the TESDA. So the TESDA recently connected with us with Dean Lizan, and they are interested in building an institutional framework for TESDA as well.
Yeah, John, very quickly, I just want to put it on record that we are really embedding futures thinking and futures literacy across programs at the DAP Graduate School. So we have the youth, we have the private sector as well, and the military sector. So we will be creating scenario sessions with our military officers next month. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherman and Lizan. It's really exciting to hear about all the cross-government work that you've been doing. And of course, having impact at different level and different scale, and really working, as you said, to embed this across government. We're gonna keep things moving, and we're gonna jump over to colleagues from Westminster International University in Tashkent. We've got both Pete and Ikram joining us to talk a little bit about the work that is really just getting going. Of course, we're still in the candidate stage, but really excited to have an example from Central Asia as well, which is not always included when we talk about Asia Pacific and have events like this. So Ikram and Pete, over to you both.
Okay, I'll start for a little bit, make some comments. Sherman, I'm inspired by you. I used to teach at the same university in policy analysis and methods. And my thesis was actually on composite dialogues and transformation during devolution, as old as it might be. Let me share a couple things, just 3 points. I feel like we're a strong generation behind the Philippines and what's just emerging in Uzbekistan. There's some convergence here. The notion we're taking is, again, anticipatory governance, but I think the context is very different. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Central Asia is still spinning in this post-Soviet centralized planning mode. And that makes using futures literacy and futures work here quite challenging, while there's many opportunities. Why here in Uzbekistan? Again, the context is compelling, and there's movement in democratic, social, and economic reforms. Not even movement, not even what you would call study progress on all fronts, but definitely some reforms that cannot be changed. In the context of that, we believe there's hunger for new ideas, hunger for new approaches. Again, things move so fast on the policy dimension that we don't know if there's any deep thought, undergoing some of these activities. Regarding futures work, there's a question of, well, who does this here? We've had some inroads in government into ministries of finance and Ministry of Economic Development. These are sort of what you might call gateway ministries that affect a lot of other work going on. And that's been through some emerging partnerships with some ADB staffers, which again have the futures work in their tool belt, UNDP, which again has had experience with this in past. OECD, and obviously interacting with the Futures Literacy team in Paris. And we have a new UNESCO head in the country who is very switched on to futures literacy and is quite familiar with the work from when he was stationed in Paris. Also, we have the convergence of John becoming a senior research fellow at the university. So there's a small cadre and we're building momentum. So I think that's good. One of the, I want to say, mantras that comes up, I think, in government especially is, well, show me first. Give us some success stories about using futures here in Uzbekistan. So we have a number of, development projects. One sponsored by UNFPA on gender-based violence. FAO looking at prices and markets. OECD looking at green recovery post-COVID. And EU looking at knowledge systems from the national to the village level to the national level. So the question is, if these are not specifically futures projects, how do we get our foot in the door and create experiences within? So I think our strategy is to both begin and end with futures work in these efforts. So create some expectations in the beginning, some familiarity, and end with anticipation of what could be, by encouraging imaginations and helping the participants to generate alternatives beyond business as usual, beyond just the normal strategic planning cycles. So I don't know if this makes sense, but definitely a work in progress. And I don't know, Ikram, do you want to make some comments on Uzbekistan? And
thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, colleagues, having me in this forum. So Uzbekistan, as you know, is a young independent country. We are only 30 years of independence, and now current government are doing very good reforms, namely in education. For example, the number of higher education institutions has been increased twice for past 5 years, and enrollment for the higher education also increased more than twice. Then the government having good reforms for all areas and giving opportunities for our people to grow, and with support of international organizations, including UNESCO, ADB, World Bank, and many others. And as an educator, I would like to highlight about the education. And one of the big initiatives of the current government is to have Uzbekistan third renaissance. You might know that Uzbekistan territory in the past having 2 renaissance in the middle centuries. Now government striving to have third renaissance. So education is one of the key pillars to achieve that such a goal in Uzbekistan. And government also increasing the funding for education, science, and also research. And many institutions been established by collaborating with international universities, top-ranking universities, and also having good collaboration with international organizations, organizing several conferences and collaborative research and projects. And I believe we in the near future we will achieve that big goal of the government, having our third renaissance in education. Not only education, and as I said, education is one of the pillars. And now what kind of problems, issues we may have in Uzbekistan is the number of institutions are increasing, but we need more expertise in higher level, I mean PhD and higher level, in order to feed that institutions. Just increasing number of institutions, it would be not enough. We also need to pay attention to the high qualified expertise. That's why in our institution example, we are hiring many international colleagues from all over the world. Currently, we have 1/3 of our colleagues are international. That's why our other local institutions also striving to do more collaborative work in order to strengthen our research capacity and capability.
Thank you so much, Ikram and Pete. Really exciting to hear from.
Thank you. Let me just jump in with two observations there. What's really important.
1 minute, and then we have to move on. Please go ahead.
The demographic note with the enormous youth population, I believe 30% now under 20 in the country, and the opportunity that education reform brings to do things differently. So that to me is a renaissance driven by young people and driven by new ways of education. That's all, thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Pete and Ikram. It's really exciting to hear from all the chairs. And of course, we have, starting from Malaysia, a rich history, a lot of dynamism, but a real sense of what works and how it's being put into place. And of course, as we heard in the Philippines, lots of adoption now. We're seeing acceleration, we're seeing integration. And of course, in Uzbekistan, really seeds being planted, really sort of early stages, being able to create the opportunity for transformation. We are going to move on in the program, but I'll ask all of the panelists from that session to put into the chat, when you think about the opportunities for a network, for ADB and UNESCO to collaborate and to help to support this network, what are the resources that you need? What are the resources that you see as being critical to the success of a joint ADB UNESCO network focusing on further futures literacy across the region? And again, if we could put that in the chat, that would be great. We'd love to also have further questions in the chat, and I'll invite everyone to continue to put those in. We're going to shift now into the next session, which is a transition in future studies. What brings ADB and UNESCO together? Really excited to have Suzanne and Arndt from ADB, and also Riel, the head of Futures Literacy in UNESCO, and very excited also to have Dr. Julius Gatune, the UNESCO Chair in Kenya for Socio-Technical and Anticipatory Systems, joining us for this particular session. So I'm going to share my screen. I believe we've got some slides for Suzanne and Arndt. And Suzanne and Arndt, we will toss it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And while you share the slides, and I think you can go directly to the first one, maybe we need to explain what brings us together. I mean, that's your question also. I mean, we are a development bank, right? So we have projects, we provide financing for development projects, for programs, also to some extent, policy-based lending. And at that level, we already it's already decided what needs to be done. So we need to have partners who help us shape upstream how and with what kind of tools developing member countries engage with us. And for that, we realized that we really need to build local strength and local networks like the ones in Uzbekistan, Philippines, and what we heard in Malaysia, because only then can we ensure future thinking and foresight is actually institutionalized throughout civil service and throughout various organizations. I think what we all struggle with is many people are very fascinated with future thinking and foresight, but then they question, well, how does it really lead into action? What is now happening differently? And so we started this work, and there is a report available, Future Thinking in Asia and the Pacific. We have engaged with Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, People's Republic of China, Cambodia, Philippines, also in Indonesia. Again, we see lots of interest, especially among the younger civil service staff members. But again, then the issue, how do I translate this now into policy? How do I translate it into my projects? And that's something we want to work together. And I think another important point is that we are also actually training our staff inside in ADB. We have leadership training programs which include future thinking and foresight. We have workshops with our country offices, and we have certification training. Also, we're doing this with Sohail and Adam, which we're rolling out throughout the organization so that we also change our own mindset. I think yesterday, if you listen to our panel, there was a bit of criticism from Mr. Ban Ki-moon, who said even development organizations often look at the quick wins and not necessarily at the long game. And I think that's what we really want to change. We want to be the partner in the long game. I'm handing over to Anne to share some sector-specific work we are currently doing. And yeah, we are looking forward to engaging with the chairs and strengthening this network and creating a regional resource for future thinking and foresight, and of course linking it with research about what works and what doesn't.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and I'm going to take you a little bit deeper into what ADB has done with one of the sector groups. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this is an unusual suspect. It's our transport sector. Now you have to think about ADB as a bank that's been around for a couple of decades, and it has built a lot of the infrastructure that we enjoy in Asia and the Pacific, including many roads, many railways. Lots of that infrastructure has made great impact. But in the future, it's not about building country roads anymore. It's about much more than just construction of infrastructure. We all know that. But there is trends that are impacting on the transport sector that take us way beyond the physical. AI, some of the transformations that are going on with population that make us think about how we can use existing infrastructure differently, and so on and so forth. So an obvious candidate within the bank to think differently about the future. The transport sector not only volunteered to go first, they basically took the initiative and said, we want to do a future study. We want to look at trends of what's driving change. We want to look at what the impact on our sector might be. And we want to define, at least begin to define regionally, what types of futures we might be looking for. We would then also derive some principles on how we can get there, and finally evolve some strategies on what would be baseline visions, what would be progressive visions, and what would be truly transformational in the transport sector. Next, please. In about a month's time, I hope all the work on the layout and everything else will be done on this report, and that'll be a regional study that we did together with our partners at ARUP, which is a transport or technical consulting company that works globally. We partnered to really dig deep into what these trends are and to evolve something that could inform that future work. And I'm very excited about this because, next slide, what we've been saying from the beginning is that, yes, we can think about these trends regionally, we can think about all these things ahead, we can think strategically, but then we need to somehow root it again into context, into what happens at country level and what happens at institutional level. And so for that purpose, what we've evolved, next please, is a accompanying product, which is kind of a playbook for people. They can read the report, get inspired about what's happening in the region, and then take it down one notch, land it, if you want, into country context, and think about what this all means for their specific projects, for their strategies at country level. We've produced the playbook, we are producing trend cards, and with that, hopefully we'll really chew on this material. One of the things that's in the pipeline is a phase 2. We've called this a preliminary study because we acknowledge that this doesn't tell people much about how they might be thinking about their concrete context. We want to go to that country context into projects. So what's on the cards next is a project where we will be looking specifically at the digitalization of urban transport in Indonesia, and also more strategically within 2 of our member countries in the Pacific, taking this into the very peculiar situations that small island development states find themselves in, because their transport really does look different from many other parts in Asia and the Pacific. This is an example of one of our sectors going really into the thick of foresight work. It's been going on for about a year, very participatory, involving lots of different groups in ADB and even involving training. And we hope that in the future, when we have partnerships like the one with UNESCO, we can count on our partners at country level to really work with us and digest this information, but also evolve it and bring in lots more ideas that are contextual and can inform our work. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Suzanne and Art. We're gonna shift now over to Riel. Riel, I've got your slides queued up and I can navigate for you. So
Great.
when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Just head to the next one. So thank you very much, everybody. Very pleased to be here. let's think about this, diversifying why and how people imagine the future. I had a conversation with an architect the other day, and he said to me, well, the first thing I do is I interview people about the building that they want. What is it they want? How do they want to, put together their home, let's say, or their warehouse or their office space? And then the second thing he said is, I really want to think about how the building is ended up going to be repurposed after a certain period of time, because after all, it's concrete, it's going to last a long time, it's going to be repurposed. And I said, look, when people come to talk to you and express their interest in a building in a particular way, have they ever lived in a house, in the case of Paris, we're talking, where they didn't have already a kitchen, a living room, a dining room, a bedroom, a bathroom, set up in a particular way? Did they ever go to an office that was, really very different from just, getting into the reception, then finding a space? On what grounds could people imagine things differently? What would give them the inspiration to be able to imagine a different way of living and organizing their lives and thinking about how to deploy all that concrete that will be around for centuries? And when it comes to repurposing, how do you know? How do you imagine what that highway, that dam, the big infrastructure project is going to serve, what purpose it will serve, like the pyramids in Giza as a tourist attraction 100, 1,000 years later? And this is where diversifying how we imagine the future, and you can go to the last one, it needs, I think, to be taken into account. And this is the idea here of being able to realize that the images of the future we have, a living room, a dining room, a job, an office, are ways that our imaginations get constrained, that we don't really have the capacity, because we don't exercise it, to bring the kind of practical impact of letting go of the past into what we see in the present. And I think that this is really kind of a very on the ground, but also quite a democratizing component. And it's also something that helps to, I think, address the issue which has been central. Go to the next slide. That we've been struggling with around the world, which is how to get people to understand their own anticipatory assumptions, how to get them to have a relationship to the school you're building there. Well, you're building the school there and you're putting in all this beautiful building, and you think of it because it's a stepping stone for your children. And where did that idea come from? What model of historical and human development is based on putting children inside 4 walls in concrete for 12 years? Where exactly did that come from, and why are we perpetuating that? You can go to the next one. So the idea here is to be able to reveal people's anticipatory assumptions. That's a cyclotron. Those are invisible aspects of the atomic world around us. And the idea here is to be able to find ways for everybody to be able to dig into the historical, but also the current ways in which they imagine the future. Next slide. Yeah, making the invisible visible. Strategic foresight or futures, helps us to plan. And I think it's a very powerful tool for planning. Everybody knows about it, and we can obviously do it much better. But since 2012, we've been running these labs in the ADG. Gabriela Ramos made reference to it, the Assistant Director General, that this diversity of reasons and methods that humans use for imagining the future is something that's hugely powerful. Next slide, John. It's something that we've seen has resonance all around the world. And now these futures literacy labs, which have taken place in every continent, and working with institutions like the Asian Development Bank and like the UNESCO Chairs in the Asia Pacific region, allows us to drill down and actually find the resource that opens up the imagination, and that does something that everybody sees as obvious, but is not so easy to do, which is you can't describe the world today on the basis of a dictionary from 10 years ago. We all know that. And you can't describe the world 10 years from now on the basis of the dictionary from today. What's going to happen in between? We're going to invent new words. Entirely new conditions are going to come up, COVID-19. And the question becomes how agile we are, how capable we are at improvising, not just planning. And this is, I think, what is resonating in this map that you see. And I think we can go to the last slide, John. which is just to say all these incredible chairs that are coming at our anticipatory capabilities as humans from so many different directions, because our anticipatory universe is so rich. And by diving into this really rich universe and putting it to use in the context of work that the ADB does that's so central, that all the development banks do that is so central to humanity's well-being, to be able to bring that to bear from within the organizations and outside the organizations, I think is one of the major challenges that we face, and is particularly relevant given what we understand about climate change, given what we understand from the COVID-19 pandemic, that we need to be able to be in much greater harmony with the natural world around us, that we need to be much more modest and humble in some ways, but we need to also be, I think, in a position to feel that we own, that this is something, these are futures that matter to us. They're not futures coming from outside and from somebody else. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Riel. I'll invite Julius. Julius, if you would like to share slides, you're welcome to share screen. And we would love to hear a bit about your perspective and experience doing the work of the chair in Kenya.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a slide to share. Basically, I'll be talking about what we are doing in terms of the Futures Chair here in Kenya as part of the global network of Futures Chair. So our chair, my chair here is based at the Dedan Kimathi University of Technology. This is a technology university based in central Kenya. And we are really looking at technical systems, how to, there are three things that we really want to do. First of all is to support policy processes, policy making. And in this regard, we have done a number of things. We have supported Africa Development Bank in thinking about the future of work. We are supporting Nigeria as a country to think about Nigerian futures, because Nigeria has been going through a lot of challenges, and UNDP supported a program to do there. I also currently finishing some work on industrialization features for the SADC, and also have just finished a thought piece on for UNIDO on thinking about informal sector, because we know we have huge informal sectors. How are they go? And in face of the ongoing Industry 4.4, fourth industrial revolution, what does it mean for that, and how do we start helping them? Because obviously there are a lot of opportunities. So in that sense, we are trying to support policymakers to think more creatively of how to improve better futures. But also the other thing we are really also trying to do is just embed futures literacy. As I've been said, this is a new capability and we want people to have it. So on one hand, we are trying to develop a program within the university and also across other universities to start making futures literacy become part of embedded in curricula, so that either people initially want researchers to start going into that, if your people are doing research, maybe to go to an FLL workshop. So even as they think of a problem, they can start thinking of a problem in a different way, so that the research is more anticipatory. And also we are also supporting Africa Academy, PARA, which is a Pan-African organization supporting agriculture research, is actually creating a foresight academy, and is going to have a number of nodes to help people, again, to also to support researchers to be more anticipatory, but also to create a community of practice. So we have been doing this, and also with the UNESCO office here, we're also doing a lot of work in terms of doing FLL workshops with two objectives. First of all, is really to create knowledge. For example, we have done a workshop on reimagining innovation. We're also doing something we have also done with the youth and future of work. Just where policymakers, but also at the same time, these have been training workshops, because we're also trying to build a community of practice. As you know, if you're going to have an impact, then you have to have people who have these skills. So we are doing a lot of work in terms of building a strong community of practice. But right now we have been supported by UNESCO, there's the office in Paris, but also other nodes. This is part of a global network. The idea is really to we also talk to other people, but we also want to develop a community of practice, basically help spread the future literacy, but also be part of the global network that we are part of. We also support others. And also interesting, and I think Sohail mentioned it, the whole idea of trying to make futures less abstract. So we have really thought about that. How do you bring features to the level where people don't get scared and start thinking, oh, this is something quite abstract? We have been doing something interesting in terms of how to recover that anticipatory posture. Because if you look at our languages and our culture and how people traditionally made decisions and how people traditionally interacted, there was a very strong use of proverbs and sayings and idioms and such. And if you look at some of those, you could see a lot of embedded language in terms of anticipation and in terms of warning people, in terms of helping you to think of differently, things change and so on and so on. So in a way, we would want to start bringing that back to see how can we help people to understand, yes, much of this is a formalization process. Anticipation is not something new. Society has done it in different ways. And in the past, this is how it was done. Then that starts helping us actually bring features more to the community level. Because the interesting part of this, the university, is that it was actually a community project. The people there decided to put a small technical college because they were basically coffee farmers and wanted to see how they can put on some skills. So it became a small community college, which went to a technical, and then finally became a technology university. So in a way, we are a product, as a university, we are a product of anticipation. And we start wanting to see how do we go back and start now going back to the same community and start seeing how do we then empower them, because they have that power actually and they had it. We're just trying to more formalize it. So bring that features to the ground level. So that's basically what we are doing. And as I said, we are part of a global community and we are looking forward to support. And actually we have had talks with Sohail and other nodes in Asia to see how we share and how we bring all what we learn and what they learn to be part of this global community. Maybe that's also my initial remarks. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Julius. To hear you and Riel, of course, it's a reminder that we're discussing the opportunities of a regional network, but of course there's a global network, and of course to tap on ADB's international network as well, and to be able to leverage all of those relationships and to bring those to bear on spreading and enhancing the ways with which people use the future and futures literacy across the region. We've got about 10 minutes left. We initially had slotted a little bit more time for question and answer, but it was really great to hear from all of the rich experiences. So I wanted to go back to a few things that were mentioned. There was questions around locating the futures literacy component, or thinking about how you might bring this to organizations. Is it internal? Is it external? And we heard a bit about sort of a more ecosystem approach. We've discussed a bit about gender and looking at critical issues specifically across the region, how to further explore different topics and issues. But I wanted to really open this up back to the question of sort of what might it take to further enhance the work of this network, of course, and think about how to really launch this. And we had some responses as well from the chairs. So I would invite further reflections from Riel, certainly from Suzanne, or from any of the chairs as well, to be able to give us a little bit more on what you think really are then the critical next steps. What do you think needs to start if we take the perspective of what do we start doing on Monday to really bring this to life?
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, I mean, your question on what we do on Monday and what we expect from this network is really, I think that we carve out work plans, a work plan for this regional network of chairs in a participatory approach, and identify maybe experimentations or certain projects where we can understand better how foresight and future thinking actually leads to policy decision or to changes in development. And then capture those and share them across this network and hopefully inspire others. So we see this network as a conduit between these different chairs, and hopefully also the colleagues from Kenya across other regions. I mean, that's where UNESCO's role then of course also comes in as a global organization.
I'll just pick up from Suzanne on this, and I think these are really fundamental points. And when I say 110 or something futures literacy labs, and Julius makes reference and Arndt makes reference to the transport work that they're doing with ARP, what we see there is, in a sense, this effort to unpack the anticipatory kind of premises. And in the questions that were put in the chat about, what do you do with the issues around biospheres, or the Belt and Road Initiative, and how do you embed it into that? It's really at a very practical level, as Arndt was suggesting, with playbooks and with the exploration of people's stories. And I think that the challenge in some senses today, in terms of that integration into the work of the ADB, into the work of UNESCO, into the work of other development banks around the world, is at a very practical level of what Julius was saying. How do we make this something that people can relate to themselves, that they can tell the story themselves? And I mean, it might sound not all that glorious or grand, but really it's a big job. I mean, it takes considerable effort, because it's hands-on. It's learning voyages. And we just need to think of any kid or any person who's going to be learning something. You don't say to them, well, you heard that you want to know this, now you know it. It doesn't work that way. You have to take the time and make the investment and collaborate. And as Julius was saying, the cultural, the linguistic, the metaphors, the myths, as Sohail has made so clear throughout all of his work, is that the way in which our hopes and our fears get articulated is something that requires deep levels of respect and accompaniment and collaborative thinking, collective intelligence. So I think we have a huge agenda at a concrete level of putting this into place together.
Thanks, Suzanne and Riel. I think as I hear you speak, we get oftentimes, and this is certainly one of the drives that we hear on the government side, is this, give me the insight, give me the product. And I think one of the strong narratives to come out of this is, the process is the product, and being able to take and to foster that journey, being able to create the conditions for seeding change and transformation. And then also, of course, having a space, as you mentioned, Riel, for improvisation, and seeing that we have to be able to not be stuck in a mindset of forecasting the future as that's only one way to use the future, but being open to the emergent future. We've got just a few minutes left, so I would invite any final thoughts and reflections before we toss it over to Riel for the closing. So anyone else would like to jump in?
I'm happy to, John, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So again, as you know, how I think in terms of levels. So level one is very clear, right? Joint impact projects, processes, books, reports, conferences, workshops for ministers, prime ministers, all that stuff. We get that. Level two is really building in what ADB with Suzanne and others are doing, is moving from infrastructure towards knowledge-based solutions. So this is knowledge-based futures we want to create all over the region. And there's ways that we know people want, whether it's gender equity, health ecosystems, well-being systems, all that, we see that emerging. And every country wants knowledge advice on that. And every person wants advice on that. Now, level three is this cultural shift. Past-based, short-term, futures-based, long-term. And we have to make that link. Otherwise, there's not one decision maker that will go with us. So that's pretty clear to me. The part that I'm seeing emerges there in a partnership, who are we? Clearly, is it an elephant and a lion? Is it two rhinos, kangaroo and a koala? So that's what's not clear here. With ADB and the chairs, we need a shared story as we partner forward. Then we get real immediate clarity who I am in this network. So task one is, to me, always the meta task. And every client, whether it's a 5-year-old or an 80-year-old, they all want to know the same thing. What's my meta story? Once we get that, the rest is really let the engineers and accountants figure it out, and then develop, as Suzanne is trying to do, empirical evaluation. So this is the part that's not clear to me. Suzanne said conduit, Rio said voyage. So I think in our few minutes, if we can throw around a few stories, and then there we go into what are some pragmatic action learning experiments we can do and find funding for. Because my experience is, once the story is there, money chases you.
Thanks, Sohail. Would love to have thoughts on that, and certainly we can use the chat as well. I see Arndt has raised his hand. Arndt, you wanted to jump in, but again, would encourage folks, if they have ideas on what's the story, to please add that into the chat.
Yeah, just to share a little bit about what what experience we have doing foresight in ADB, I think our HR would pride itself to say that we hire the best experts in these domains that we work in. But the best experts on, let's say, energy may not always look beyond their field to understand the full picture of futures. They'll be looking very much at their domain area knowledge. And we just can't work like that anymore. I mean, we probably never could, but we did. And so now this adjustment of realizing that we need to go way beyond has found its way into our thinking, has found its way into core debates at ADB, it's found its way into this report that we're doing. And with that, it means there's a platform for communication where you can bring, let's say, the beaver that ADB is, which is beavering away at some construction, and the owl that UNESCO is, which is in education and very wise, together to talk, you know, and actually figure out how these two worlds can complement each other. We would immensely benefit from rooting a lot of the conversations we have about futures informed by our world from the conversations that go on in universities with youth, and we don't have that access as easily as UNESCO does.
Okay, so I see the metaphors, the stories rolling in. We've got the beaver, we've got the owl, I see a butterfly. I put up, it's almost lunchtime here, the hawker stall. So what happens when a beaver, an owl, and a caterpillar walk into a hawker stall? I think that's the story that we're heading to.
I think maybe if I can add something here,
we've got just
John,
1 minute left.
I think what we really need to do, we need to link the intellectual capacity of academia and UNESCO to the practical implementation aspects of multilateral development banks. And as you know, we are also working with OECD on a foresight group for development banks, which hopefully then ensures that whatever financing comes, it considers the future. So this is hopefully what this network can also help with.
Yes, so we've got the owl and the beaver fostering the intelligence and the wisdom needed to be able to create the new story, the Futures Feast in Asia, where all are welcome. Well, I think that's a great place to land. Riel, I know we had slotted you for some sort of closing remarks in the next minute or so. Do you want to bring us home?
Absolutely, and just I'll keep it very, very short. I think that, you know, this is exactly what this network is about, and I think we're confronting in a way that's very positive the shift from a perspective which saw improvisation or agility, lightness as in some senses negative qualities, and something that's meant to build up a very broad-based confidence in the ability to make sense of emergence and novelty, to really reconcile ourselves as a species with a world where surprise, where change is the only certainty. And by reconciling ourselves with that, being able to continuously take advantage of the creativity of the world around us. And I think that this multidisciplinary, but also, and I would say, I wouldn't be so frightened about the confusion and the messiness. This is going to be messy. We're experimenting. We're testing things. There's going to be failures. It's precisely because this is not just planning and not just ex ante results that are known in advance, that we're doing this. We're walking the talk of being futures literate. So I'm really excited by all of this and very grateful, as I think everybody is. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Riel. And thanks to everyone. Really excited to see the messiness that emerges from the owl and the beaver's collaboration and creating a space and futures feast for all. So we're going to wrap this session. But again, want to thank everyone for joining, for your contributions, for your engagement. And really excited to have you join us on this journey as we help to create this new story. We've thrown up a poll here, so we would love to have your feedback on the session. And again, want to thank all the participants, all the panelists, and really excited to have everyone commit to enhancing and strengthening futures literacy across the region. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Please stick around, enjoy the rest of the forum, and yeah, have a great time.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. Sohail, Suzanne, Arndt, Julius. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.